San Diegans accomplish great things every day. We care about our neighbors and our community. We are proud of our diversity. We are resilient. We hold our leaders accountable. We live in one of the most dynamic cities in America, the San Diego Union-Tribune, telling San Diego's story for more than 150 years.
Hi, I'm Kim Dwinell. I'm an illustrator, animator, professor, and I'm a lifelong surfer and lover of the ocean.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the San Diego Union-Tribune Festival of Books. My name is Vanessa Gempis, a teen librarian with the San Diego Public Library, and I'm super excited to be here with Jerry Craft and Minh Lay for today's panel. Jerry Craft is a New York Times bestselling author, illustrator who has worked on numerous picture books, graphic novels, and middle grade novels. He's also the creator of Mama's Boys, an award-winning syndicated comic strip. He's won 5 African American Literary Awards and is a co-founder of the Schomburg Center's annual Black Comic Book Festival. His most recent work, Class Act, is a follow-up to the Newbery Award-winning graphic novel New Kid, which also won the Coretta Scott King Award and the Kirkus Prize for Young Readers Literature. So picture book aficionados will be familiar with Minh Lay through his books such as Drawn Together, which won the 2019 Asian Pacific American Award for Literature, and Lift, a nominee for this year's Eisner Award for Best Publication for Early Readers. Minh also serves on the board of directors for We Need Diverse Books and has contributed to numerous national publications, including the New York Times, the Huffington Post, and NPR. While known for his picture books, he set his sights on a slightly older audience in Green Lantern Legacy, his graphic novel debut for middle grade. So thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us.
So, since both of your graphic novels feature kids in middle school, in 1 or 2 sentences, can you describe what you were like as middle schoolers?
Minh, you want to take it first?
Yeah, sure. I was painfully shy in middle school. I was like, did everything I could to avoid attention and kind of like slink around in the shadows. I was just like so shy about like speaking up and like using my own voice. So the fact that I get to do these public speaking things and speak at festivals would blow middle school Minh's mind, and would think that middle school Minh would have no idea how he got to this point. But yeah, painfully shy is how I would describe myself.
And I basically was Jordan Banks from New Kid. I was always the smallest and the youngest in my class. I always loved to draw. I love comics. I think because I was so small and we used to tease each other a lot, that I really honed my wit, to have some like snappy comebacks, so I wouldn't be picked on. And that has paid off. I made my living from my sense of humor for the last 100 years. So that was basically me, Jordan Banks.
All right. So what made you decide to write for the middle school or middle grade audience?
I actually love the innocence of it. I think about YA occasionally when people will ask, "Oh, you should do YA." I'm like, I'm really comfortable like in this area because I can be really subtle. I can broach difficult themes. Like in New Kid in Class Act, I talk about race a lot, but it's not something horrible that's going to happen. And I like knowing that readers will know that if they read one of my books, that they will be safe, and they won't have nightmares afterwards, like something horrible happened. So I really like being in that little bubble for myself.
Yeah, no, I agree with all of that. And for me, when I started writing Green Lantern Legacy, sometimes people would ask me, is it strange to write a comic or a graphic novel for a middle grade audience? And my response is always like, it seems like the perfect audience to write for, because if you think about an origin story with a superhero, it has all those same beats and all those same themes as a coming of age story like The New Kid or Class Act. It's like all about a character who's like coming into their own, kind of like getting a sense of their newfound powers and like how they fit in with the world, how they're going to relate to the world. But yeah, if I look at books like Class Act and New Kid and all those types of coming of age stories, I see a kinship with the superhero genre and origin story. So it felt like a very natural fit to me.
And you know what, the fans, I really love like the kids. Like you get early readers, you get struggling readers, you get these people that you've like changed their lives, you know. And even the criticism really comes from the heart, where sometimes right for an adult audience, you get that kind of meanness where they just want to like tear you down a little bit. But the kids, if they have something to say, always listen because it always comes from a place of compassion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just agreeing with Jerry.
Oh. So, in terms of feedback, what would you say is the best kind of feedback that you've gotten from middle schoolers or other readers for your work?
I get a lot from parents who were like or teachers who will say like, my son or daughter hasn't read a book all year and sat down and read one of your books in one day, and that was a new thing, and it was like, mom, or they challenged a mom or teacher to read it, and they really have this kind of like kinship with the book. And knowing that I created something that might get a struggling reader to look for other books is basically the highest compliment I can get.
Yeah, for me, I was struck by the number of comments I get from parents and their kids, and saying how refreshing it is and empowering it is to see a superhero that looks like them, right? Like when I was growing up, most of the Asian representation in comics was mostly sidekicks or stereotypes. So to see a new generation of readers embracing a character and feeling the ability to be the main character, to be the hero of a story, means the world to me. And then to see like the reaction with, there's a lot of like fan art and cosplay out there, just blows my mind.
I love having the boy and his grandmother too, like that intergenerational thing. And I always try to put that in my books because I felt growing up that a lot of the grandparents were always kind of wacky, you know, and I always think of like my dad and wanting to respect him. But that was why one of the things I really loved about Green Lantern Legacy. So good job, man.
Oh, thank you. I love the grandfather in your books as well. Like you said, like there's a role and relationship between parents and their kids, but then there's another role that grandparents can play in a story and in a life that is very unique. So I feel like the grandparent character is always really fun to include. And for me, a lot of times people ask me like, what is it like to write a Vietnamese boy as a superhero? And I'm like, it's pretty cool. But I really like writing the grandmother as superhero because like for me, that's something you don't see as often. And my grandmothers were always like real life heroes to me. So be able to portray a character like that really was really something that I couldn't pass up.
So I'm hoping we get to see more of her in the future, maybe some flashbacks, because she was so amazing. And I really love actually all the adults in both your books because they are so real and well-rounded. You have the well-meaning teachers who often put their foot in it. You know, as a person of color who has gone to primarily white schools, it has been, I was like, oh, I've had that teacher. I've seen that teacher. So that was really, really fun to see. And it's always great to see more Asian representation everywhere, really. So what was it that drew you, pun intended, to the graphic novel medium?
Man.
Well, for me, it was a total surprise because, as you mentioned in the intro, my background is in picture books, and that's kind of where I got my start and where my heart is. But I got this call out of the blue from DC Comics one day saying, we're about to start a new line of graphic novels for young readers, and we'd like to invite you to pitch us a story. And my first reaction was, I think you have the wrong Minh because I write picture books. But luckily they're like, no, we've seen your work and we're intrigued and want to see what you could come up with. So they just kind of gave me they opened the doors and said, take a look at all our characters from, Superman, Wonder Woman, Batman on down, and see what you could come up with. So for me, that's the dream. I loved reading comics when I was a kid. I also grew up reading like a lot of mythology. And to me, it feels like comics and superheroes are very much like modern mythology. So to be able to be part of that world and to add something to that universe has been super fun. Pun intended.
Yeah, I always loved reading comics as a kid. Like, I wasn't a book reader, but I still have my like 5,000 comic books from when I was a kid, like about 10 feet behind me. And that was the only thing that I read that I enjoyed. As Minh said earlier, I didn't see much representation of myself either. I felt like most of the books, if they had any Black characters, they were from 300 years ago or 100 years ago, and they were not having a good day. That's for sure. And I, so in comics, it's mainly sidekicks too. So I started doing my own comics, but could never really draw superheroes as well as I wanted to, because I thought I wanted to be the next great artist of Spider-Man or Silver Surfer. But I kind of gravitated to a more humorous style because I liked that better, and then went to a comic strip, and then did that for a while, and then turned the strips into books. And then when it came time to do New Kid, I was like, can I even do a 250-page book? Because when I was a kid, I never thought I would read a 250-page book. So can I write and illustrate one? So that was kind of my goal, and put a lot of work into it, but I absolutely love it.
Yeah, and for me, as someone who writes but also has kids who are in school and they read, they're voracious readers, there's something about the graphic novel format that, like, back when my kids were physically in school, they would read a graphic novel, pass it on, and they're just like, it would make the rounds and it would circulate among their peers in a way that created this real community of reading and love of literature that is hard to capture with like a long novel or something, right? There's something about it that feels very communal. And I loved seeing how quickly and how excited they were with bouncing these books around, and how like tattered the books would get. And so I know that there are sometimes people who push back against comics as like they're not real books, or graphic novels are not real books. So I think that's why it's so huge to have the New Kid with the stamp of approval of the badge on it, because that gives a real weight to it with librarians who may be slower to come around, like the one in the New Kid. But I think people are starting to realize that there's real literary value here. And as a writer, and I know that Jerry does this really well with his books, with graphic novels, you have the text, you have the artwork, and then you have the interplay between the two. And you can do so much there. And there's so many layers of meaning that you can embed within that. If the picture, what's going on in the pictures don't match up with the text, and there's like some irony there, there's all this kinds of things that you can do with a graphic novel that I think is unique to the art form.
And the one thing, as you'll attest to, when you're writing for a graphic novel, like in a prose novel, you could just say Jordan walked into a room. Mm-hmm. You have to know everything that's in the room. So I'm actually sitting down, I'm like, okay, so his mom and dad might have some African statues in the back. They may have a painting here. They may do this. What color shoes do they have on? What color shoelaces do they have on? So you could put so much stuff that might not even be mentioned in the story, but there might be an urn in the background or some kind of like special artwork that you have to put in there, that it's up to the reader how much that they actually want to go in and see that stuff. But I know, I would say 10% of the stuff I put in, probably no one ever notices, but I still feel good about doing it.
Yeah. But the great thing about that is that it's a style of storytelling that rewards rereading. So when someone goes back in, though, there's all this stuff that they can notice that they didn't notice the first time around. And it's like walking into a room and getting to enjoy different corners of it each time. So I think there's a richness there, even if people miss it on the first pass.
Right. And there's so much that you can save with the words, because, like if you have, a character saying, "Hey, Minh, great to meet you,"
Mm-hmm.
right? But now if he's like, "Hey, Minh, great to meet you," like just by rolling the eyes up, it's a whole nother thing.
Right.
So the reader has to look like, okay, is he excited? "Hey, Minh, great to meet you." Or, "Hey, Minh, great to meet you." Like you put all that, so they really do have to piece it all together. So I think it actually jumpstarts another portion of their brain. So they are definitely real books.
Yeah, and I think about like how we consume information these days, and so much of it is visual. That having that visual literacy and being able to deconstruct and put the pieces together and figure out what the meaning is a really useful skill for readers to have, and probably something that's very essential moving forward.
So speaking about how you guys have included, or how Jerry, you included details that you don't think readers are ever, not 10% you don't think readers are going to notice. When you are writing it, do you have the scene kind of in mind already? Have you already kind of drafted that, like a rough outline of what you want the page to look like when you're writing the manuscript?
Yeah, I do, and I've actually learned that more so, like the more comic book guys I hang out with, and I will, when I go to these conventions and they do stuff, I'm in the audience watching. I remember seeing Jamal Igle break down the Superman page, and I was like, wow, and so I take that and I put that in of like directing the page and having this happen and the shadows will point. So I am always learning. I love to learn and make it better. So I hope that Class Act is better than New Kid. I hope that book 3 will be better than Class Act, because I'm still learning new stuff. And that kind of visual excitement, and seeing the kids watch it and read it and send emails just wants me to always be better at it. So absolutely love it.
And for you, Minh, I know that you worked with an illustrator, Andy Tong. So when you wrote the manuscript for Green Lantern Legacy, did you have an idea of what you wanted things to look like, or did you just kind of let them go to town?
And that's a great question. When I feel bad because, like, unlike Jerry, I don't do the art, so I feel like I'm cheating. I only do the first part. But when I was working with the editors, and something they used to say is like, it's unlike a movie where like you have like a special effects budget and you have to kind of think within the realm of what's possible. They're like, when you're writing a manuscript, there's really no budget. There's no limitation. You can set your scenes wherever you want and have whatever happen. The only limitation being you don't want to drive your illustrator off a cliff by saying something that's so impossible that they can't do it. But they kept pushing me. And the thing about someone like Andy, who is such a veteran comic artist, he was able to take very kind of like thinly written action sequences and just turn them into these amazing fight scenes. And they're so dynamic. So as a writer, my goal is always to like put enough of the story down so that the illustrator knows what's happening, but to not dictate so much that it gets in their way or weighs them down. I mean, I think working with an illustrator like Andy, he knows how to work a comics page better than I do. So I want to give him as much room as possible to do what he does well. So yeah, it's a fine balance, but it's that spirit of collaboration when you can't do the whole thing by yourself that really, to me, makes the book reach another level.
Minh, did you see the process as it was being done?
Yeah, for this one, for like, unlike picture books where there's not much back and forth during the process, this one, Andy would send me drafts and thumbnails as we went, and so we kind of worked on it together as we went. So yeah, it was a fascinating process to be a part of.
That's good, because I as an illustrator, like I've illustrated a few books for authors, and I wasn't supposed to send it to them. Like you send it to the editor or the art director, and it's up to them if they show it. And I was always kind of weirded out by that, because I always felt like as a writer, you kind of want to see it. You don't want to wait until the very end to see it. So I'm glad you had that, that process.
Yeah, with Green Lantern Legacy, we were on such a tight timeline that we had like different trains moving at the same time. So we're always kind of like very hands-on the whole way through. So it was great to watch it unfold. And Andy is such a generous illustrator, and he would ask for feedback on certain cultural details to make sure that he was getting the things right. So yeah, it was great to work with him.
That's awesome. So this one is for Jerry. You do such a great job of balancing the serious and then the biting messages in New Kid in Class Act with these great moments of like just laugh out loud humor. So how do you maintain that balance?
So as a kid, like I felt that entertainment was always learning, like I grew up in the Fat Albert era where there was always a message, and in between the cartoons, it was like Schoolhouse Rock, and they were teaching you, and Time for Timer taught you healthy snacks and stuff like that. So it's always hard for me to separate like information from humor. I kind of like to put them together. But I also feel like as an African-American creative that it is very easy to scare people away. And so I knew that in order for me to address some of the serious topics, I had to make it as laugh out loud funny as I could, because I've always felt like it's very easy for someone to perceive it as an angry book, or complaining or things like that. So one of the good things about doing the comics with Mama's Boys is my pacing was always panel, joke, panel, joke. So I had a lot of humor in it. So when I did this, I tried to keep it so that it still had that same, maybe not a joke every 3 panels, but enough humor in there where even if, there's some tense scenes that you could kind of relax and laugh out loud and read it again the second time. And then even the third time, there's, silly stuff happening either visually or verbally. So it's very important for me to make it funny.
And you definitely succeeded.
Well, good.
So for Minh, you've written quite a few picture books. What would you say is the biggest difference between writing for younger kids versus a graphic novel for older kids?
Mm-hmm. The most obvious one is length. I remember when I first started working on the graphic novel, they're like, you have 120 plus pages to work with. I was like, how do you fill 120 pages of a book? I have no idea. But for me, I kind of think of it as they're very similar styles of storytelling because they are visual storytelling. And I kind of think of the difference as like when you go to see a Pixar movie, there's a Pixar short at the beginning, then there's a feature length. A picture book to me is like a Pixar short. It's very condensed. It's very kind of fine-tuned and narrowed down and honed down to something very kind of like distilled, right? And there's often not a lot of talking. And to me, it's that's how I think of picture books. So for me, a graphic novel is kind of like a long form picture book, and you suddenly have a lot more space. A lot of the picture books I write don't even have any dialogue. But with the graphic novel, you can explore characters in a different way, have conversations. There's a lot more character development that you can do over 120 plus pages that you can't do over 32. I think they each have their own strengths and weaknesses. I think they fit really well together as far as like the types of stories I like to tell, because I like to rely on the talent of illustrators to help bring these stories to life. I always tell people that I feel like I found this cheat code to making books because I put down like this like manuscript for a picture book. It's like 1 or 2 pages. And then the illustrator uses their prodigious talent to turn it into this amazing, beautiful book. So I'm just glad I get to do this for a living.
So I don't really feel like it's a cheat code because we can't do the other part without you. So all important part of the process. And so you guys both did a really wonderful job of capturing the middle school voice and experience. Is there anyone in your life that you were drawing from to capture that experience?
A lot of what happened is my life as a kid combined with my 2 sons. So when I did New Kid in Class Act, like I was the kid who was 12 and everyone else was 13. All my friends were 5'3", dark skin with curly afros. I was 3'5", light skin with straight hair. I wanted to be an artist. So a lot of that was me. And then I got to experience again as a dad, watching my sons go through private school, but now as an adult, I'm a lot more aware of the nuances. So I was able to say, listen, when they talk about Black History Month for the first time, don't be surprised if every kid in the class is going to turn and look at you, you know, and then they come on, yep, Dad, you said it was going to happen. It happened. So there were a lot of those things that happened. And I would take the seed of it and exaggerate even, you know, like even the police stop in Class Act happened to me where, you know, I'm driving and the police officer was like, hey, take those off. And I had on my Giants gloves. And it was just, he was mad that they just traded Odell Beckham Jr. So he was like, hey, how can we still root for him? And he's laughing. And meanwhile, I've got like, you know, sweat coming down me and that kind of thing. And, you know, so yeah, a lot of the stuff in both books has actually happened.
Yeah, and the same for me is like a lot of the writing was trying to draw on experiences that I've had, experiences that my family has had. And like I said before, as a middle schooler, I was like painfully shy. So I was in my head a lot. So I think that creates kind of like this like incubation phase of like you're in your head, you're already like, I'm like a lot like the like Jordan and the New Kid was like very artistic storytelling oriented. It was just all internal, right? So now it's like as a writer now I'm trying to tap into what that middle school Minh was thinking and kind of externalize that and like capture that for the page. So yeah, it's tricky to try to capture something that's new. That's something that I try not to fall into the trap of is like trying to capture the right vernacular because that's going to change so quickly. So I kind of just try to capture like within Green Lantern Legacy, there are three friends. Try to just like capture the kid dynamic and something like that happens in New Kid a lot too. It's like just like the relationships and like how kids bounce off each other and like it's that it's almost like the words that they're using are secondary to the energy that they bring to each other. And I think as a writer, it's like trying to capture that somehow. So yeah, a lot of it's just trying to draw on my own memories and then like paying attention to the kids around me and then just trying to write something that feels true.
I was just going to ask if you eavesdrop on kids' conversations because that's the best.
Yeah, something.
As a teen librarian, I can tell you it's hilarious.
Oh, absolutely.
So I think we've got time for one last question. Can you tell us a little bit about what's coming next for you or what you guys are working on?
I literally just this morning sent in the script for New Kid 3 to my agent and my editor. So that is the big thing. And we are in the very beginning stages with Spring Hill, which is LeBron James's production company with Maverick Carter, of a New Kid movie with Universal Pictures. So that is something that it is now full speed ahead doing. So
that is so exciting.
That's so exciting.
And yeah, no, I just a few months ago turned in the manuscript for Green Lantern Alliance, which is the sequel to Green Lantern Legacy. So that's in the works right now. And I have a few other books in the works as well. I also moved to San Diego right before COVID hit. So I'm looking forward to now, as things are opening up, getting to explore San Diego a little bit more. So
welcome. Definitely check out the library. It's really cool. All right, actually, I think I have time for one more question. So if you could go back and give your middle school self one piece of advice, what would it be?
Yeah, I think it is definitely to embrace the people who are like me a lot sooner. Like sometimes in middle school, you feel like you need to be with a certain crowd or whatever, but you know, find your comfort zone, and those are your people. That's your tribe. You know, my friends read comics and played video games. You know, and once I found that was my crew, then that was who I was. You know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, mine would probably be similar, something along the lines of letting that Minh know that like your experience is valid. It has value. Because I think for me, as a Vietnamese American, I had that like sensation of like going in between worlds, which I think in the New Kid happens a lot too. It's like at home, I was the American kid. At school, I was a Vietnamese kid. And I always felt like because of moving back and forth between the two, it made me feel like I was never enough, right? Of one or the other. And I think that now as a writer, a lot of what putting these stories down is doing is like kind of planting a flag in that in-between space and saying like, this space is real, this space is valid. And then it's taken me till I'm over 40 now to come to that realization. So I would just go back and let him know that that's coming down the road, and that he doesn't have to wait that long.
That's awesome.
That's great advice from both of you for kids of all ages, all kinds. So Jerry and Minh, thank you so much for your time today. So if you'd like to read New Kid and Class Act or Green Lantern Legacy, and you should definitely want to read them, you can purchase their books from our indie bookseller partners at bookshop.org/swap/SDFOV. And if you'd like to consider supporting the San Diego Council on Literacy, please visit literacysandiego.org. And then, if you're sad that our panel is at an end, don't worry. The San Diego Festival of Books has a full program of author panels, demonstrations, and live entertainment streaming online. You can check them out at sdfestivalofbooks.com. Once again, thank you all for joining us. This is Vanessa from the San Diego Public Library signing off. Enjoy the rest of the festival.
Thank you, Vanessa. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, Jerry.